6 acres of standing water, and a pickup truck. That's all she had left. The parish assessor stamped it at $4,200. Nobody even argued. But Nola Cartwright wasn't looking at what was wrong with the land. She was looking at what the water was already doing, and she was taking notes. 6 acres of standing water and a pickup truck. That's all she had left. Nola Cartwright pressed her knees into the black clay at the water's edge, the mud soaking through her dark brown canvas work pants at the same spots that were already stained from 100 other shifts spent kneeling. Her black and white marbled composition notebook lay open on her thigh, a pencil tucked into the spine catching the last copper light of a Louisiana afternoon. She hadn't written anything yet. She was just looking. But we need to back up, because before this moment, before the mud and the cattails and the silence thick enough to chew, there was a kitchen, a loud one. Nola worked the line at a place called Brander's in Monroe. Not a restaurant, really, more like a building where food happened to people. She stood over a flat-top grill for 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, pulling $11.50 an hour before taxes. The grease settled into everything, into the creases of her knuckles, into the collar of her faded olive-green canvas work shirt, into the cotton fibers of the off-white undershirt beneath it, so deep that no amount of dollar-store detergent could pull it out. She smelled like old fryer oil even in the shower, even in her sleep. Home was one half of a cinder-block duplex on Renwick Street, where she shared a wall with strangers who played their television loud enough that she could follow the plot of their shows through the drywall. Rent was $680 a month, and she was late on it so often that the landlord had stopped calling and started taping notices. The math never worked. It wasn't supposed to. $11.50 an hour was never designed to add up to a life. It was designed to keep someone too tired to notice they didn't have one. Then the phone call came. A Tuesday. Nola was standing at the grill with a spatula in one hand and a burn on her wrist she hadn't noticed yet. Her phone buzzed in her back pocket. A 337 area code she almost didn't answer. A woman's voice she didn't recognize told her that her great-aunt Pearline Cartwright had died in her sleep at the age of 81, alone in a shotgun cottage in Acadia Parish, and that Nola was the only living relative anyone could find. Pearline. Nola had met her exactly 3 times in her life. A quiet woman with hands like leather and a voice like a screen door. She'd held on to 6 acres of bottomland that nobody wanted, land that flooded every spring, land the parish had tried to condemn twice, land that sat in a floodplain so low the Army Corps of Engineers had literally drawn a line around it on their maps and written the word unsuitable. Pearline held on to it anyway, not because it was valuable, because it was hers, the only thing that was. The following Saturday, Nola drove south. 3 hours on I-20, then down through Alexandria, then onto parish roads that got narrower and rougher until the asphalt gave way to gravel, and the gravel gave way to mud. She found the property at the end of a road that wasn't really a road anymore. The shotgun cottage sat on cinder blocks, its tin roof streaked with rust the color of dried blood, its porch sagging on the east side where the joists had softened. Around it, the land opened up flat and wet in every direction. Standing water covered the back 4 acres, shallow and tea-brown, catching the sky like a dirty mirror. Cattails grew in thick stands along the south edge. Mosquitoes rose in clouds from the ditch line. And the smell, God, the smell. Wet earth and rot and green, all tangled together, The kind of smell that gets into your throat and stays. Nola sat in her truck for a long time. Then she reached across to the glove box and pulled out the composition notebook. It was blank, brand new. She'd bought it at a Dollar General 3 days earlier without knowing exactly why. She opened it to the first page, pulled the pencil from the spine, and wrote the date in small, careful letters. Below it, she wrote a single word: water. A diesel engine idled across the ditch. She looked up. A man sat in a mud-spattered white pickup, watching her through the open window. Mr. Arsenault, late 60s, stocky and barrel-chested, silver-gray hair combed straight back, pale blue eyes set deep beneath heavy silver brows. He had a dented stainless steel thermos tucked under one arm and 3 days of silver stubble on his square jaw. He leaned back on his seat the way he leaned back on his heels, like the world could come to him. "Your auntie couldn't do nothing with it wet, girl. You sure can't." He said it the way you'd tell someone the store was closed, like he was doing her a favor, like the information was free and she ought to be grateful for it. Nola looked at him. She didn't answer. The freckles scattered across the bridge of her nose caught the light as she turned back toward the water, and the faint birthmark on the left side of her neck, shaped like a thumbprint just below her ear, disappeared into shadow. She stepped out of the truck, pulled on her scuffed brown rubber boots, the ones caked with dried black clay from the duplex's sorry excuse for a yard, and she waded in. The water came up to her shins, warm as bath water, soft-bottomed. She walked slowly, carefully, and then she saw them. Crawfish chimneys, dozens of them, little mud towers rising 2-3 inches above the waterline, each one a perfect cylinder, built grain by grain by something living beneath the surface. She knelt. The notebook rested against her hip. She watched the water move around the chimneys, watched the light shift from copper to violet, watched the mosquitoes settle on her forearms, and she did not swat them away. She stayed until the light was gone. Back in Monroe, she did 3 things in 4 days. She gave notice on the lease. She quit Brander's. She loaded her truck with everything she owned, which fit in the bed with room to spare. At midnight, Nola stood in her duplex kitchen. The lease termination letter lay flat on the counter. Her car keys sat in her hand. She hadn't told a soul. She walked out the door. The headlights cut through nothing. No street lamps out here. No porch lights from neighbors. No glow from a town on the horizon. Just the twin beams of Nola's truck sweeping across a gravel path that hadn't been driven in months, maybe longer, catching the silver trunks of cypress trees and the dull gray face of a cottage that looked like it had been holding its breath for years. She killed the engine. The silence that rushed in was alive, thick, buzzing, layered. Tree frogs, thousands of them, singing in pitches that overlapped into a single trembling wall of sound. Somewhere out in the dark water, a bullfrog hit a note so low it vibrated in her sternum. And beneath all of it, the faint, constant whisper of water moving through grass. Water that didn't care who owned the land it covered. Nola carried a rolled mattress through the front door first, then a camp stove, the kind with a single propane burner and a windscreen that never stayed upright. Then a library copy of an LSU agricultural extension manual on aquaculture, spine already cracked. A receipt from the Monroe branch tucked inside as a bookmark. She set the manual on the kitchen counter, next to the composition notebook. That black and white marbled cover already soft at the corners, pencil tucked into the spine like it lived there. The cottage had a sound roof. That was the best thing about it. Perline's roof didn't leak. But the plumbing had been disconnected years back. The pipes drained to keep them from freezing and never refilled. Wasp nests clogged 2 of the 3 window frames in the front room, paperied gray architecture built by creatures who'd claimed the place fair and square. The linoleum in the kitchen had buckled near the back door where moisture crept in. A single bare bulb worked in the hallway, wired to a breaker that hummed like it was thinking about quitting. She cleaned it with a garden hose run through the kitchen window and a broom with half its bristles gone. Swept the wasp nests out at dusk when they were sluggish. Scrubbed the counters with diluted bleach she'd brought in a gallon jug. Boiled water on the camp stove for drinking, for washing her face, for the instant coffee she drank from a ceramic mug with a chip on the rim. That first night, she lay on the mattress on the floor of the back bedroom and listened to a world that had no interest in her presence. The darkness was absolute. Not city dark, not even country dark, but bayou dark. The kind where your eyes never adjust because there is genuinely nothing to see. The frogs sang. Something splashed in the water 40 yards from the house. The walls ticked as they cooled. And Nola lay there with her hands on her stomach, staring at a ceiling she couldn't see, and let the idea that had been circling her for weeks finally land. Stop fighting the water. Farm it. Not rice field crawfish, not the industrial method where you flood and drain on a schedule with pumps and levees and diesel bills. This land flooded on its own. It had been flooding on its own for longer than anyone in the parish had been alive. The water came in from Bayou Cortableau through a network of shallow channels that Perline's family had never tried to stop, because stopping it would have cost more than the land was worth. The water pooled in the back acres, 14 acres of it, give or take, and sat there through winter and spring, warm and shallow, and thick with the kind of organic debris that crawfish treat like a buffet. The enormity of doing this with $1,600 in savings, no running water, and a library book sat on her chest like a stone. She didn't push it away, she just breathed under it. 3 months she walked that land. Not once a day, 3 times, 4 times, sometimes at 2 in the morning with a flashlight and a thermometer. She drove stakes into the soft ground every 20 feet along the water's edge and ran string between them, creating a grid that looked, from the road, like the work of someone who had lost her mind. She recorded water depths at each stake, temperatures at dawn, noon, dusk, drainage rates after rain, how many inches dropped in 24 hours, in 48, in 72. She sketched the flow patterns in the composition notebook, arrows curving around hummocks of grass, pooling in depressions she measured at 6 inches, 11 inches, 14 inches deep. Pages filled with numbers that would have meant nothing to anyone who hadn't stood in that water and felt it move. The parish noticed. The parish had opinions. Mr. Arsenault, silver-gray hair combed back, pale blue eyes squinting from under those heavy brows, dented thermos tucked under one arm like always, leaned against the counter at the Ville Platte gas station and told whoever'd listen that Perline's granddaughter was out there playing in the mud. Said it with a chuckle, not with malice, which was worse. The neighbors didn't dislike Nola. They just looked at her the way you look at someone stacking rocks in a parking lot. Polite, blank, already looking past her. Then Trent Hebert came. His sedan was so clean it looked offensive on that mud road. Light blue Oxford tucked into pressed khakis, brown leather belt with its little brass buckle catching the light, polished tan loafers that he looked down at twice before stepping onto the porch. He carried his slim brown leather portfolio folder against his chest like a shield. The shallow dimple in his right cheek appeared when he smiled, which was often because Trent Hebert smiled the way other people breathed, automatically, without meaning it. He sat at Perline's kitchen table. He opened the portfolio. He looked at the loan application Nola had mailed in 2 weeks prior. He looked at the land through the window, and his face did that thing, that polite, sympathetic rearrangement that bankers learn somewhere between orientation and their first denied application. The composition notebook sat on the table between them. 3 months of water depths, temperatures, drainage patterns, sketches of flow channels, calculations of forage density per acre. Trent didn't glance at it, didn't ask what was inside. It was just a notebook to him, a thing a person like her would carry around. No productive history on the parcel, no drainage infrastructure. Collateral value assessed at $4,200. He said it all gently, like he was explaining weather to someone who'd never been outside. Then he closed the leather portfolio, stood from the kitchen table, and delivered the line that would follow Nola Cartwright for the next 2 years of her life. "I'd love to help you, but I can't write a loan on a flood." He walked out to his sedan, didn't look back, didn't need to. Nola sat alone at Perline's table, the notebook open in front of her, the page full of water depth measurements that meant nothing to anyone but her. The morning after the loan denial, Nola sits on the porch steps with the notebook in her lap, pencil behind her ear, looking at the flooded back acres. She does not cry. She turns to a clean page and writes, $1,600, materials list. That is nearly everything she has. $1,600 between a checking account Perline opened for her when she turned 18 and a coffee can of 20s tucked behind the water heater. The sum total of 2 years of weekend work at the feed store in Breaux Bridge, 4 summers of mowing cemetery plots, and 1 tax refund she never spent. $1,600. Trent Hebert wouldn't write a loan on a flood. Fine, she'd build on one. 3 days later, she's driving 47 miles north on Route 31 in Perline's truck, the suspension groaning over every crack in the asphalt, because a man named Boudreau, outside of Eunice, posted a handwritten sign at the co-op. Retiring. Rice equipment for sale. Make offer. His yard looks like a metal graveyard. 14 sections of corrugated aluminum culvert pipe, each one 12 feet long, stacked on railroad ties behind a rusted grain bin. A second-hand water control structure, basically a concrete box with 3 steel gate valves, sitting in the weeds like somebody's forgotten headstone. Boudreau wants $2,000 for the lot. Nola offers $1,400. He laughs, not mean, just tired, the way old farmers laugh at young ones. She opens the notebook, shows him the sketches, the retention cell layout, the drainage channels, the depth calculations in her own neat handwriting. He looks at her, really looks, at the freckles across the bridge of her nose, at the mud dried into the knees of her brown canvas work pants, at the pencil tucked into the spine of that marbled composition book like it belongs there. He says $1,200. She says deal before the word finishes leaving his mouth. Loading those pipe sections alone takes her 3 hours. Each one weighs close to 90 pounds. She rolls them up a pair of 2x10s into the truck bed, and by the time the 14th section clangs into place, her palms are raw, and her olive-green work shirt is black with sweat. The water control structure takes Boudreaux's tractor to lift. He doesn't charge her for that, doesn't say why, just nods when she pulls away. August in southern Louisiana is not a month. It is a punishment. 97 degrees by 9 in the morning. Humidity so thick the air feels chewable. You don't breathe it, you chew it, swallow it, feel it sit in your chest like wet bread. Nola works alone in knee-deep water on the back acres, setting pipe, digging channels, and the swamp does not care about her blueprint. Mud sucks at her rubber boots with every step. Her shins open on the corrugated pipe edges, thin red lines that sting like paper cuts dipped in salt water. Blisters form on her palms by noon, break by 2, and by evening her hands look like something that lost a fight with a cheese grater. Mud in her ears, mud in the corners of her eyes, mud worked so deep under her fingernails it won't come out for weeks. But the engineering, crude, patient, and functional. Levees built from the black clay itself, the same heavy alluvial gumbo that everyone else curses. She tamps each wall by boot and shovel, packing it dense, shaping berms 18 inches high and 2 feet wide at the base. Retention cells carved to hold water at specific depths, 8 inches in the shallow ponds, 14 inches in the deep ones. Gravity-fed drainage channels following the natural slope she mapped in her notebook across 3 months of measuring with a borrowed line level and a length of garden hose filled with water. No surveyor, no engineer, just the composition book, the pencil, and the land telling her where it wanted to go. Then one night in mid-August, a hard rain rolls through, 3 inches in 2 hours. And in the morning, the east levee wall on her second retention cell has collapsed, just slumped sideways into the pond like a tired dog lying down. Mud everywhere. 8 hours of work gone. She stands there in the gray morning light, her boots sinking, the notebook pressed against her hip, and for maybe 30 seconds she doesn't move. That's the doubt. That's all it gets. 30 seconds. Then she kneels in the mud and looks at what failed and why. The clay cracked along a seam where she hadn't packed it tight enough. Water found the weakness and pulled it apart. But along the north edge of the collapsed wall, where a thick mat of cattail roots had grown into the berm, the levee held perfectly. Cattails. The same ones that choke the drainage ditches on Perline's land, the ones every farmer in the parish sprays and burns and hates. The root mat is dense as woven rope, threaded through the clay like rebar through concrete. The land teaching her how to use it. She rebuilds the levee that morning, packing cattail root mat into every layer, and it holds through the next rain, and the one after that, and every one since. September comes slower than it should. Nola seeds the ponds with wild crawfish stock trapped on her own property. Wire mesh traps baited with fish scraps set along the flooded tree line where she's watched crawfish burrow since she was old enough to notice. She relocates gravid females into the retention cells, one trap at a time, careful as a surgeon, because each one carrying eggs is a future population. Patience measured not in days, but in egg cycles, in water temperature, in dissolved oxygen levels she estimates by watching how the water moves at dawn. The notebook by now is half full. Water depth charts logged daily, crawfish population estimates by cell, drainage timing calculations cross-referenced with tide tables from the Atchafalaya Basin. Page after page in her neat handwriting, the pencil lines getting darker as the lead wears down, the cover soft and warped from humidity. It is becoming the blueprint of something no one else can see yet. Late September, the water control structure is in place. Nola opens the first gate valve and watches Bayou water fill her first retention cell in a slow, controlled pour. The notebook is tucked under her arm. The water does exactly what her sketches said it would. January came in cold enough to see your breath, which in southern Louisiana means something. Mist sat on the ponds like cotton, thick and low, barely moving. The kind of fog that swallows sound whole. 4:15 in the morning, the sky still black, and Nola Cartwright was already wading into the first retention cell with a dip net in one hand and a 5-gallon bucket in the other. The water hit just above her knees, cold enough to make her legs ache, and the mud underneath sucked at those scuffed brown rubber boots with every step. She moved slow, deliberate, sweeping the net in long arcs just above the bottom, feeling for weight. The first pull came up heavy. She lifted the net out, and the mist parted around it, and there they were. Crawfish, a dozen or so, clicking and flipping against the mesh. Red-brown shells, dark as old pennies, claws raised and snapping at nothing, tails curling with that sharp, muscular snap you can hear if the morning's quiet enough. And this morning was that quiet. She tilted them into the bucket, and they hit the plastic with a sound like a handful of wet gravel. She could feel their weight, dense, firm, bigger than they had any right to be for a first-season harvest from converted bottomland. That first week, she pulled 38 pounds total. Modest. Nobody's getting rich off 38 pounds. But here's what mattered more than volume. The quality was absurd. She cracked one open that first morning, standing ankle-deep in cold water with mist curling around her shoulders, and the tail meat was white and clean, firm enough to hold its shape, sweet in a way that tasted like the land itself. The nutrient-rich bottomland water, fed by that Bayou channel she'd spent months engineering, had done exactly what her research predicted. Mineral content in the water column, feeding the algae, feeding the crawfish, feeding the flavor. A closed loop. A system, written out months ago in pencil in that black and white marbled composition notebook, now proven in the taste of a single tail. The roadside stand went up the next Saturday, and when I say stand, I mean a sheet of 3/4-inch plywood laid across 2 sawhorses at the edge of Parish Road 22. A hand-painted sign, white background, green letters, slightly crooked, that read, "Cartwright Crawfish, $4.50 per pound." A cooler of ice underneath. That was it. No canopy, no banner. Just Nola in her olive-green canvas work shirt with the sleeves rolled, the notebook tucked against her hip, standing behind a plywood counter in the January chill. First day she sold 38 pounds, every last one. Revenue, $171 even. She wrote it down. Date, pounds, price per pound, total. Back page of the notebook, in pencil, in handwriting so small and precise it looked like ledger work. Delphine Mouton showed up on the second Saturday. Drove over from Crowley in a white pickup that had seen better decades. Stepped out in her white chef's coat with the sleeves rolled, that thin gold chain catching the morning light, the worn wooden tasting spoon tucked in her pocket like always. Broad-shouldered, sturdy, moving with brisk confidence. She bought 2 pounds without asking questions. Then she did something Nola didn't expect. She cracked one right there at the stand, standing in the gravel, steam rising off the shell in the cold air. She ate it slow, chewed with her eyes half closed. That single deep dimple on her left cheek appeared, then disappeared. She came back 20 minutes later and bought 10 pounds. Came back again before noon and bought 20. Then she leaned one hip against the plywood counter and looked at Nola with those slightly hooded, dark brown eyes and said 5 words. Where has this been? Not a question about location, a question about time, about why this flavor hadn't existed in her kitchen before now. Nola didn't answer with words. She just opened the notebook and showed her the water chemistry page. Delphine studied it for 11 seconds, nodded once, and asked about weekly supply. That was the beginning of a standing order. 30 pounds a week, delivered Thursdays to the back door of Delphine's restaurant on North Parkerson Avenue. Reliable income, real income. The kind that lets you buy fuel and feed and replacement mesh without doing the math twice. Meanwhile, Nola had been running a quiet experiment nobody asked about. All that water hyacinth and cattail she'd been clearing from the drainage channels for months. She hadn't burned it or dumped it. She'd been composting it. Dense mats of vegetation broken down in long windrows behind the cottage, turned every 2 weeks with a pitchfork, mixed with pond sediment and crawfish waste. The result was a soil amendment so dark and mineral-rich it looked like chocolate cake batter. She spread it across a 1/4-acre vegetable plot near the cottage in late November, worked it in by hand, and planted winter stock. The results by January were, frankly, ridiculous. Tomatoes the size of fists, 14 ounces each, deep red and splitting at the shoulders from their own juice. Okra growing 6 inches in a single week. Bell peppers with a sweetness that didn't make sense for stock planted this late in the season. 11.2 bricks on a borrowed refractometer when 7 was normal. The hyacinth that everyone in Acadia Parish treated as a nuisance, a plague, a thing to poison and curse, was producing soil that grew vegetables like this. Produce joined the crawfish at the stand by the 3rd week of January. Revenue climbed. $171 became $290, became $435, became $612 in a single Saturday. Every sale recorded in the back pages of the notebook. Dates, pounds, dollars, customer names. 47 names by the end of the month. People driving from Rain, from Iota, from Eunice. Word was moving. And on the last Saturday of January, a light blue sedan slowed on Parish Road 22. Trent Hebert behind the wheel, sandy brown hair neatly parted, hazel green eyes scanning the line of 8 customers waiting at a plywood table. His slim brown leather portfolio sat on the passenger seat. The car slowed to maybe 5 miles an hour. He looked, counted the people probably, noted the sign. He didn't stop. Nola didn't notice. She was weighing out 3 pounds for a woman who'd driven 40 minutes from Church Point to get there. Second spring. The weather report calls for 6.2 inches of rain over 4 days. Nola hears it on a battery-powered radio in the cottage kitchen and walks to the window. She doesn't look worried. She looks ready. The rain starts on a Tuesday, just before noon. Not the dramatic kind, not thunder and sideways wind. Just a steady, warm, relentless pour that turns the air into something you could wring out like a dishcloth. It hits the tin roof of the cottage in a constant hiss, the kind of sound that erases every other sound until you forget what silence was. By Wednesday morning, Bayou has risen 14 inches above its normal spring waterline. By Wednesday night, it's risen another 9. The ditches along Parish Road 22 disappear first, then the gravel shoulders, then the low spots in the yards. Brown water, tea-colored, carrying the smell of turned earth and rotting leaves, and something older than that, something mineral and patient, the smell of a landscape remembering it used to be a swamp. Mr. Arsenault's yard floods badly. Water pushes into his equipment shed, soaks the bottom shelf where he keeps his seed stock and a 40-year-old rototiller he's been meaning to fix since the Clinton administration. He's out there in rubber boots and his faded red and gray flannel, that dented stainless steel thermos tucked under one arm, watching brown water lap at the concrete pad. Doesn't say much, just stands there with his pale blue eyes narrowed under those heavy silver brows, looking at a problem he's too old and too tired to solve with muscle. Across the road, a 200-acre soybean field belonging to a commercial operation out of Jennings goes completely under. Every row, every plant. $34,000 in crop loss. Just like that. Just rain doing what rain does when you pretend the land is flat and the water has nowhere to go. The parish sends pumps, big diesel units on trailers that roar all night and move water from one low spot to another low spot, which is about as useful as rearranging deck chairs. You know the rest of that saying. NOLA's system performs flawlessly. The retention cells fill in sequence. First the shallow one nearest the road, then the middle cell behind the first levee, then the deep cell along the eastern tree line. Exactly the order she drew in the black and white marbled composition notebook 18 months ago, sitting cross-legged on the porch with a pencil tucked into the spine, sketching arrows and elevation marks, while everyone else in the parish was watching football. Her drainage channels direct the overflow south and west, down the natural gradient she mapped by walking the property with a 4-foot level and a ball of twine, toward the lowest acre, the one she designated as a sacrificial buffer. That acre floods. It's supposed to flood. She planned for it to flood. Her levees hold, every single one. Packed clay and root mass and patience, holding back water the way a good sentence holds back silence. Just enough structure to let the meaning through. The water does what her notebook said it would, and the crawfish thrive in the high water. More surface area, more forage, more of the warm, shallow flooding that Atchafalaya reds have evolved over millennia to exploit. Nola pulls traps all week in her scuffed brown rubber boots, caked with fresh black clay, the faded olive-green canvas work shirt soaked through, the birthmark on the left side of her neck, just below the ear, glistening with rain. 112 pounds in a single week, her largest harvest yet. She's out there hauling wire mesh traps from brown water, while her neighbors are pumping out their yards, while the soybean operation is filing insurance claims, while the parish is running diesel pumps at $1,100 a day. Nobody narrates the irony. It just sits there, fat and obvious, like a bullfrog on a fence post. Delphine Mouton's restaurant in Rain has been buying Nola's crawfish for 5 months by now. Steady orders, fair prices, no negotiation games. But something changes after the flood harvest. The quality of these crawfish, fed on natural forage in clean, slow-moving retention water, instead of the stagnant agricultural runoff that most commercial ponds sit in, is different enough that Delphine's customers start asking questions. Where do these come from? Why do they taste like that? Why is the fat this color? So Delphine does something small that lands like a cathedral bell. She prints new menus. And on the Tuesday after the rain stops, when Nola drives to Rain to deliver 41 pounds of live crawfish in mesh sacks, she walks into the kitchen entrance, and Delphine is standing there, broad-shouldered, feet wide, hands on hips, the worn wooden tasting spoon tucked into the pocket of her white chef's coat, that single deep dimple on her left cheek showing because she's almost smiling. She hands Nola a menu without a word. There it is, third item under appetizers, printed in the same font as everything else, no fanfare, no asterisk. Cartwright Bayou crawfish. Her name, on a menu. In a restaurant where people sit down and order food and pay money and leave satisfied. Nola reads it twice, runs her thumb across the words, doesn't say anything for a long time. Looks right, Delphine says. And it does. A food writer from Lafayette named Simone Guidry visits the restaurant 2 weeks later, orders the crawfish étouffée, and asks Delphine where she sources. Delphine gives her Nola's number. Simone drives out to the property on a Saturday, walks the retention ponds, looks at the levees, asks questions for 90 minutes, and takes photographs of the traps. The piece runs 3 weeks later in a regional food magazine, 900 words, titled, "The Crawfish Nobody Expected." Nola's phone, a prepaid flip phone she bought for $35, begins ringing with orders from restaurants in Lafayette, Lake Charles, and Baton Rouge. She sits on the porch with the notebook open, writing names and quantities faster than she can keep up. The waiting list begins. By the end of her second full year on the land, Nola Cartwright is running a waiting list. 14 restaurants, 14 kitchens that can't get enough of what 6 acres of Bayou margin are putting out. And the same credit union that told her no, the same one where Trent Hebert sat across from her with that slim brown leather portfolio and said the land wasn't bankable, sends him back. He pulls into the gravel drive on a Tuesday morning in late October. The air is cool for the first time in months, maybe 62 degrees, and the pecan trees along the road have just started dropping. He's wearing the same light blue Oxford, the same pressed khakis, the same polished tan loafers that have no business being anywhere near this mud. But something's different. His shoulders sit lower. His hands aren't clasped in front of him like a man delivering a verdict. He carries the portfolio against his side, not his chest. Nola's grandmother, Perline, lets him in. He sits at the kitchen table, the same kitchen table where he opened that portfolio 2 years ago and said, quote, "We just can't see the return here." The same chair, the same window throwing light across the same scarred wood. He opens the portfolio. Inside are financing terms for expansion, additional acreage, infrastructure, refrigerated storage. He lays them out one page at a time, and his hands are careful, almost tender with the paper, the way you handle something you know you don't deserve to be holding. He doesn't apologize, not in words, but the shallow dimple in his right cheek doesn't appear once, because he never smiles. He speaks quietly. He refers to her operation by its acreage and its yield numbers, not as this little project or your situation. His posture is the apology. The way he waits after each sentence, giving her room he never gave her before, that's the apology. Nola listens. Her lean arms rest on the table. The faded olive-green sleeves of her work shirt rolled to the elbows, dried black clay still under 3 of her fingernails. She doesn't say yes. She doesn't say no. I'll think about it. 3 words, and Trent Hebert nods like them more than he expected. November comes in gray and soft. The water in the retention ponds holds at 14 inches, right where Nola wants it, and the crawfish traps are pulling steady. On a Saturday morning, when the fog hasn't burned off yet, and the whole property smells like wet bark and iron-rich mud, a truck rolls up that Nola recognizes by sound before she sees it. That particular rattle in the exhaust, that slow crunch on gravel from a man who never drives above 20. Mr. Arsenault steps out, silver-gray hair combed straight back, 3 days' stubble on his heavy jaw, the dented stainless steel thermos tucked under one arm like always. He stands bow-legged at the edge of her first retention cell and looks out over the water. His own land, a quarter-mile east, floods worse every season. The drainage that worked for his father doesn't work for him. The soybean field across the road from Nola's place lost 11% of its yield to standing water last spring. The man who looked at her 2 years ago and said, "You sure can't," that man is standing in her retention cells now, pale blue eyes following the graded channels, the berms, the overflow gates she built from salvaged culvert pipe and concrete bags she mixed by hand. How does the water know where to go? One question, and it costs him something to ask it. Nola walks him through it, not quickly, not with any edge in her voice. She pulls the composition notebook from where it's tucked against her hip. Black and white marbled cover, soft from 2 years of rain and sweat and daily use. Pencil still wedged in the spine, and she opens it for him. Every page. The sketches of water flow she drew in her first winter. The depth measurements taken weekly, logged in columns so tight and precise they look printed. The cross-sections of the berms. The seasonal charts showing how the water table rises in March and drops in July, and what each pond needs at each stage. She explains it the way someone explains something they love, not defensively, not proving anything, just sharing the thing itself, because the thing itself is beautiful to her. Arsenault's face changes as she turns the pages. The heavy silver brows draw together, then slowly release. His broad jaw loosens. He stops looking at the notebook like it's a curiosity and starts looking at it like it's an engineering document, because it is. By the time she reaches the back pages, where the sketches have become detailed enough to serve as construction plans, he's not leaning back on his heels anymore. He's leaning forward. The thermos hangs forgotten at his side. He doesn't say he was wrong. He doesn't have to. The numbers tell the rest. In year 2, those 6 acres, assessed by the parish at $4,200 total, land nobody bid on, land the credit union called unbankable, produced $47,600 in gross revenue. 1,840 pounds of crawfish harvested from the ponds. 600 pounds of produce from the raised beds between them. More revenue per acre than the 200-acre soybean operation across the road, which netted $112 per acre after input costs. Nola's land netted just under $7,900 per acre. From mud, from water, from patience. Early morning. First week of December. The mist sits on the ponds like something the water is breathing out. And the light is that pale silver that only happens in southern Louisiana, when the air is 49 degrees and perfectly still. Nola wades through the nearest pond with a hand net, her scuffed brown rubber boots disappearing into water the color of dark tea, the faint birthmark on her neck just visible above her collar. The cottage sits behind her. The bayou curves beyond. On the porch railing, where she left it, the composition notebook lies open. The page it's turned to is so full of numbers and sketches and notes that there is no white space left. Not a margin. Not a corner. It started with one word written on the first line of the first page. Water. And now it contains the entire operating manual for a system nobody believed in. Built by a woman most of them dismissed, on ground every one of them had given up on. Some ground isn't broken. It's just waiting for someone patient enough to ask it what it wants to grow.